Before removing your pinion, you have to take the flange off. You should mark the pinion to the flange. We're going to do that with a centering punch. We see our two marks right here. Now we have to keep the flange from spinning as we loosen the nut. There are several holders that we're going to use, or several ways that we can do this. First one is a specialty holder. This is a Toyota tool. The pin pulls out. It's designed to slide in through one of the mounting holes. Pin goes in, and now you can hold it from going this way or hold it from going this way. And it's a long enough lever that gives you lots of leverage. Another method might be if you have a standard universal spanner wrench. You can use the spanner wrench in this fashion to hold it from turning. Or this spanner wrench, which is kind of a special tool that's been made into a spanner wrench for this purpose, and that can be done like so. This will hold it quite well as well. This holder is actually designed for the yoke style flange, however it can still be used for this type of flange. We simply need to use a couple of mounting bolts this way. Place a couple of nuts on the bottom side, and this will hold the flange from spinning. The last possible option would be, if you don't have any of the special tools, stick a couple of bolts in here, use a screwdriver or a pry bar as a wedge to hold it from spinning. Make sure these are scrap bolts because they will bend. I'm going to use the factory tool. And we can now ratchet this off. Don't forget to take the washer out. Magnet works nice for this. If the flange doesn't pull right up, which a lot of them won't, never ever take a hammer and smack from below. You'll bend it, and that'll create a problem. Instead, you want to use a puller. This puller will work as well as this puller. Whenever you're using a puller, you want to make sure to always put some grease, white grease, bearing grease, some sort of a grease on the end of the tip so it doesn't dig into either part. The other thing to make sure is that the threads on the forcing screw have some kind of a lubricant on them so that you don't damage the tool. This tool needs the use of additional bolts. as you tighten up on the forcing screw, the flange will want to spin. If it's real tough to come off, it may be hard to hold this to keep it from spinning. If that's the case, use a large pair of channel locks, and you can a lot of times grab a hold of the puller tool in this fashion in order to pull it off. If you're using a 2-jaw puller, such as this one, this is what the setup will look like. If it is spinning, you can use channel locks to hold it from spinning. Or, what actually works a little better, is an adjustable wrench to hold it in place. In this case, it's already pretty loose. And there's your flange. Before you pull your flange off, you should hang on to your pinion here, because sometimes the pinion will drop. And if you're going to use your pinion again, you don't want to hit the ground, damaging it. In order to get your pinion out, we're simply going to smack right on the head here, but you make sure to use a plastic faced hammer. Don't use brass, don't use metal, unless you're not reusing your pinion. Then you don't care if this mushroom's out. The other thing is you have to reach down below and you have to hang on to your pinion so it doesn't fall on the ground. And so we'll simply and we'll pull the pinion out, and there's the pinion. And here is the collapsible spacer that's used for pinion preload. To get the seals out, there's several ways. We could use a screwdriver like so. We could use a seal puller. In this case, we're going to turn it over and we're going to knock it out the other way. I don't want to damage it any more than it is. It's already pretty damaged. So we'll flip this over. And we're actually going to use the hammer handle down inside there. We're going to smack right on top here. And you need somebody to hold their hand underneath to catch it. There's my seal, there's my bearing. A lot of times there's a big washer. This washer is called an oil slinger. And of course, if you're going to reuse the bearings, you don't want them hitting the floor because you don't want to take a chance of damaging the cage or damaging the rest of the bearing. The next step would be to remove your bearing races. Now, when we look down at the front bearing race right in here, you can see its seat right here, and there's a cutout right there. That's designed for a punch so that we can knock out the bearing race. And there's one on each side here. We have a cutout on each side so you can knock that out. Now, a standard drift punch will work. However, I have a specialty punch which is designed for bearing races. I have a specialty punch which is designed for bearing races, and it looks like that on the end. And again, you want someone's hand down here to catch this when we knock it out. What we'll do though is you alternate from both sides. That process would then be repeated for the inner race. On the installation, you must make sure this surface where the race seats is very smooth, no dirt, no bumps from when you removed it, otherwise the race won't sit square. So it's very important that this is clean and inspected. All bearing races are interference fits, which means that you have to tap them in. We're going to do the same thing with the new race, making sure it's clean for the installation. Now, bearing races need to be carefully installed. You don't want to nick anywhere in the bearing area or you'll damage it. So you need to tap on the outer edge. Now, they make bearing installation tools. This is a bearing installation cone right here. Now, if you have the right size, it fits in there perfectly. Now, this one does not. Now, the very next size up that I have is actually too large. So this universal tool doesn't actually fit properly. However, flipping it over the other way does seem to fit pretty well there. The other factor will be whether it drops down into the housing all the way. Now, if it'll drop down inside there, then the outer diameter is not too big and it may put the race in there just fine. A third option is this universal race installer right here. Now, this is too big for this race that I'm using. However, it expands these jaws by threading this sleeve here. This is a lock nut, and this will work for very large races. It's a universal tool, so it's very good. Now, this universal tool comes with a hand driver, and so we need to install it like so. Once we're sure everything's nice and clean, carefully set our race down inside here. Tool in here, and we'll tap it down. You hear how solid that sounds? Usually means it's seated. We'll flip it over and we'll check it from the back side to make sure it is seated. So we're looking for a gap right in here. And if there's no gap, then it's seated properly. In order to remove the pinion bearing, we're going to use a bearing splitter, either with a puller or a hydraulic press. We need to grab on the bearing race right down close to the head. Now we have to be careful that we actually grab right here. This is your pinion depth shim, so you don't want to clamp down on that. So we're going to grab right on this edge on both sides. bearing splitter has two sides. A tapered side, which gets into tight close quarters, and a flat side. If you can get the flat side in, you get a better hold. Use the flat side. But in tight quarters, you need the tapered side. And that's what we're going to use today. And you simply adjust the threaded nuts. Now when you get them up, you don't get them up tight, you don't wrench them down tight, because you're probably actually pinching down on the pinion itself. In fact, a tiny bit loose, like so, is generally going to give you the right hold. So trying to get right down inside here. So you're not pinching down the pinion, but you're not so loose that you won't slide off of the race there. Now we can use a puller or a press to pull this bearing off. This universal puller set gives me a lot of options on pulling off gears, sprockets, bearings, what have you. We're going to use this in conjunction with these legs for the these puller extenders, and this is just an adapter that comes off. And these legs thread into the bearing splitter. We use these two parts of the puller to finish it off. We'll make sure to put some white grease right on the tip here so we don't damage the pinion. The tool is set on the pinion. The forcing screw is brought down against the pinion. And we fasten the retainers with the washer and the nut. Setup looks something like this. Because turning this is going to cause this to spin, we're going to take this over to a vise and hold it in the vise as we pull that bearing off. Simply forcing this screw down will pull the bearing up. Simply fastening the puller in a vise like so will allow you to pull that bearing off.
An alternative method to using a puller is to use a hydraulic press. Here we have a 17.5 ton press.
Looking right here, here's your scale. The inner one is 17.5 ton. This would be used for 30 tons, and this would be used for 50 tons. Therefore, the inner scale is used here. Now, for those of you that aren't real experienced with the press, and that's going to be everybody in my class, if you get up to the third to the fourth notch, which is 4 tons of pressure, and nothing has moved yet, then I want you to stop, call me over, and have me inspect your setup. You might be getting ready to break something, and I need to check it before someone gets hurt or something breaks. For our setup, V-blocks will be used on the press table. Proper use of these V-blocks with your splitter are very important. The weak spot on this splitter is the bolts. Placing the splitter on the V-blocks without supporting the bolts will cause them to bend. So always make sure the V-blocks support the bolts. We'll move this in. And we'll bring our ram down so it just barely touches. Just like so. Now we will come over and operate our pump. Raise the pressure, start pumping. When you do this, you have to make sure that you're going to either hang on to the pinion or put your hand underneath it. There, it's free. Now the spacer stuck to the bottom. We need to take a close look at this spacer, because sometimes they have two sides. This one is the same. Sometimes they're beveled right in here. This one does not seem to have any difference, so we're okay with this one. For a reassembly, we need to, after we've cleaned everything off, go ahead and put your spacer down. And you need to find a pressing tool that fits two needs. First need is it has to be able to slide all the way down over the pinion. The second need is that it must press on the proper spot of the bearing. In this case, it's got to push on the inner race without hitting on the cage. So we'll see how this fits. You can see I can actually move it around. I can free spin the cage. So this is a perfect tool for this one. We'll set it in our press like so. And we'll bring down our ram. And we throw our pressure lever. Actually, no. Okay, it is now starting to stop making noise. And a good sign you're all the way down is to go ahead and take a look at the pressure gauge and see that it's actually building pressure now. When things stop moving, every time you move the pump, the gauge goes up. Okay? So we need to take a close look to see if we're seated. Now here it looks seated, so I'm going to take the pressure off, take a closer look. Now we can see the bearing is seated tight up against here. Get a screwdriver or a pick and see if you can spin that spacer. If you can't spin it, it's seated all the way. During reassembly of the pinion into the case, And if you have a used pinion and you have marking compound all over it, you need to wash that off. Before you assemble, you want to make sure that you lubricate your new bearings, or even if they're old bearings, you lubricate the bearings, and also make sure the race is lubricated. Go ahead and set your pinion down into the race. Make sure it spins freely. Take and lubricate your front pinion bearing so that it's all ready for you to go. And have the rest of the assembly components ready. Have your crush sleeve, your new seal, if you have an oil slinger or a washer, have your companion flange ready, have the companion flange lightly greased right here where the seal seals so that it's all ready to go. Take your new seal, make sure that this is packed with some white grease as well, and lubricate on the inside with white grease so it's all ready to go. Well, this is an old seal. Also make sure you have your washer and your nut ready. In addition, a good size plastic faced hammer. We're going to flip this over and we're going to have to hang on to this. And we're going to build our assembly until we can get the nut on. Then we can let go of the bottom here. So here we go. Crush sleeve. A little bit of oil on the bearing race. Make sure it's oiled. New bearing. Washer or oil slinger if you have one. New seal. And your companion flange. Make sure to line up the marks that you made on disassembly so you get it back in the same spot. While holding on to the pinion below, gently tap on the companion flange. Our goal is to get enough threads that we can get the washer and the nut on. You need a little bit more. You need a little more than 2 or 3 threads so you don't strip it out. Now you can let go. We'll then use the holding tool like so to tighten up on that nut. Now you can pretty freely tighten as long as you can feel up and down movement. Once the up and down movement stops, then you have to tighten very carefully. Over tightening or over crushing that crush sleeve will mean that you will have to take it out and replace it and do it again. So you're pretty safe as long as it goes up and down. Never back it off. If you've over tightened, you never back off the nut and leave it where it's at or stake it down, because you're going to lose your pinion bearing preload during service. Okay, no more up and down. Now we would tighten to get the proper turning force preload. And in addition, sometimes the bearings need to be seated a little bit. Tapping on the housing when you first assemble it can help seat this. This spins pretty freely. I can tighten this up a little bit more. Still fairly free. See how stiff that is now? Doesn't take much. And moving it back and forth will sometimes free it up. It only takes a little bit to make it really stiff.